Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Property Lifestyle Mastery podcast. I'm Jackie Tomes, and on this show we are talking about everything to do with building a property business and investing in property in a way that ultimately creates freedom. And this week we are deep diving into one very specific element of that, and that is the deal stacking part of the process. So how do you make sure that your deals are genuinely going to work and that you don't sabotage them at various different stages along the process? So Dave is in his element in this session. He's going to be going through his three-part definition of what the stacking really means, and I think a lot of people miss one of these pillars and it can lead them to problems, and how to make sure that you are covering off all of the different risks that come in property. So I really loved recording this episode. They call him Detail Dave, but I actually pretty loved it as well. So I hope you enjoy listening to this. So without further ado, here is myself and Dave.
Hello.
Hello from the French Alps, end of the ski season where the snow is rapidly melting and you realise skiing isn't necessarily great when it's slushy.
Yeah, pure slush.
But enjoying the changing seasons. So today's episode is about deal stacking, and this is something that has actually always been a massive part of what we do, but I think because we've ended up doing it as so almost like part of the fabric of who we are and how we do stuff, I almost think we haven't fully appreciated how important it is to share the component parts of that, because as I'm realising more and more, the stuff that you are really great at, you just think is obvious because it's easy for you. But what is easy for you is your genius zone. And so therefore, that's what this episode is about. It's about kind of unpicking what the different elements are when it comes to stacking a deal, and laying out why that's important.
Yeah.
And what sparked this episode today, Davey?
Well, we've definitely had a few. Well, I'm always looking at deal analyzers for a start, and I've done deal clinics. I've had loads of analysed deals sent to me, and every time I do a simple process of just taking the numbers I'm sent, putting them into my own analyzer, and finding what's missing. That's the process. Find what the person has missed as a primary starting point. And what is really sparking this is that recently we've had some people around us anyway who have missed things in their analyzers, and it has massively caused.
It's changed the game, right?
Changed the game, right?
Yeah.
Huge issues, huge challenges have come out of the back of that. And you just think that could have been avoidable. Could have been avoidable. It's something that actually, with just more diligence up front and a better process, would have made the end result much better, like so much better. But that's just how it is, and that's what most people are doing right now. Most people are not diligent enough or not stacking well enough so that their end result is not what they're expecting.
It's not accurate. And people are like, oh yeah, no, I'm doing all money out deals. But all money out deals with potentially not looking at all of the numbers that are there, which means it isn't actually an all money out deal. So how are you finding the money that's left in? Particularly when you don't even fucking realise that that's actually the case. Yeah. So I guess also for me, like, we're obviously very well known for like raising finance and having a really good method around that. And this is part of the method, because ultimately you want your investors to, for one, get their money back, get their interest, and ultimately to reinvest with you. And if you're not getting this right, this is where I think we see it go wrong a lot. And I think if you don't understand what we're about to explain today, you'll also be very confused why it's not working out, why there is never any money anywhere. Like, that's another thread about like, where's all the money actually gone, dude? But this is a big component part of where sometimes the money is going.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start?
Well, I just thought I'd start with my own definition of
Detail
what it
Dave's
means.
definition.
What does it actually mean when someone says, does the deal stack? You know, that's a classic phrase. Does the deal stack? And the answer so often is, yeah, it stacks, no worries. And I just thought, I was thinking about this terminology, stack, and what does it mean when someone says, does a deal stack? So I've come up with my own definition of this, which is basically, after taking all variables into account, does the deal make enough profit to satisfy all the parties involved? That's my definition of does the deal stack.
Say it one more time.
So, after taking all variables into account, does the deal make enough profit to satisfy all parties involved?
Nice.
Detail Dave's definition
Okay, cool.
of does a deal stack.
So how do you want to do this? Do you want to maybe break down the different elements of that?
That breaks down into 3 clear elements for me. There are 3 parts to stacking a deal. You've got your variables. You've got to make sure you've accounted all the variables. You've got your profits. You've got to make sure you're clearly noting each level or each type of profit involved and what that means to both you and the other parties. And of course, that brings me to the third part. Who are the parties involved? And if you don't get all 3 of these aspects into your deal analyzer, into how you're calculating your numbers, and you miss parts of it, you do end up with pieces of your jigsaw missing, holes in your picture that then create confusion and then can be massive challenges down the line.
Nice. So what do you want to do? Go through each of those in turn and just talk about what's part of it. Nice. Yeah. So variables?
Job number 1, variables.
Tell me what these sounds so. I really think you should. What is it? The Oxford English Dictionary. You need to apply to them and say this is the definition of a stacked deal. Okay, so variables. What's part of variables?
Variables. So I mean, variables are the easiest one because basically this means have you got all the numbers? Have you found everything that is going to be part of your deal? And of course, that starts with the base, most fundamental numbers, which is your end value right? Have you got your rental income right out the other side? These are the biggest swing variables. Is your refurb figure right? These are the ones people are generally thinking about. But then there's all the other expenses around them. So all the purchase costs. Have you definitely included the cost of all the finance costs that are going to be involved? I think quite a lot of people do this thing where they run, because it's easier, they'll run the numbers on a deal without any finance. Just as a quick number, it's like back of a fag packet idea. They just run it as if it was a cash purchase, and then they're like, oh yeah, but it's fine. Like if I get bridging, that'll just be 12% extra cost on 75% of the purchase price. Things like that. They'll do a rough extra cost, but actually finance comes with so many extra costs. It makes a huge impact to your figures. Suddenly your deal that might only require 100 grand cash purchase will suddenly require 120 grand when working with finance, and that's a massive difference to how much money is going to get held in the deal at the other side, which then impact your returns. So your finance costs, if you're doing a commercial valuation or an HMO, you've got to account for 2 valuations, both of which are expensive. 2.5 grand up front for the first valuation, maybe on a bridge, and then 2.5 grand when you get to the refinance point. That's 5 grand down the drain, just because you're using finance. And even if you don't use the bridge up front, your cash purchase, and you need to refinance, you still got that quite chunky valuation at the other side. So just making sure you definitely have thought through every single variable.
Do you want to just brain dump just a few other costs that we often see missing in analyzers?
Missing costs.
Can I say solicitors' fees for the lender?
Very good. Yes.
Those guys love to overcharge. Also, your solicitor's fees on the purchase, depending on, sometimes if it gets quite an expensive purchase, those guys really load on how much they want to charge you, right? Anyway, go on. What else?
So I definitely think all other finance costs, there's lots of other little hidden costs from the bank as well. So a good example would be using development finance. And then the bank will want to send round an asset manager to make sure the works are being carried out as expected. And they will want at least 1 visit, if not 2, 3, 4 visits. Every single one of them costs you a load of money, £600-700 per asset manager visit. Suddenly you're in for another £2,000 of just cost to the bank, just to be able to use that development finance. It's another cost that I think most people don't consider when they think, I'll just get the development finance.
And let's say bridging finance is invariably not 12%.
No.
Because then you've got maybe arrangement fee, setup fee, entry fee, exit fee. You can easily add on 3 or 4% in all of that, right?
Yeah, and I think the thing I've noticed with bridging finance is it's always changing. I will think I've kind of got the measure of the market. I'll be like, no, this is how they're working right now. I'll talk to someone, no, they're going to do this. And then I'll get a new bridging, mortgage offer come through. And I'll look and I'll be like, what? They've changed the rules again. They've changed how they're working. Whether they're going to take off your interest off the loan or not, whether they'll add your arrangement fee or take it off. All these other little things that they just nuance of how they work. So just being really up to date. Don't just assume it'll be, if you're using development finance, particularly, that's where it gets particularly complex. Don't just assume it'll be one way. Keep up to date with your broker as to how different bridges are working and what you're likely to get.
As a loan to value is a slightly different one because obviously it's not a cost, but obviously then it would affect how much money you need to bring for the deal.
Yeah.
And often the headline loan to values are often a load of crap, right?
Well, they are, because someone else at the bridge will say 75% loan to value, and then they'll say, but we need to withhold all your interest for 12 months. That's the standard bridging method. We need to withhold your interest for 12 months, and that's because they know there is no cash coming in, no cash flow on the property, and therefore then they know there's no way to service the loan. So they're like basically saying, well, we'll lend you that interest. We need to take it out of your loan. We need to hold that interest back to service this loan in the meantime. The only way around that is if you've got a separate income stream that you want to go to the bank and say, look, I'll service it with this income stream, and you have to prove that whole income stream. So that immediately usually drops you to at least 65% loan to value or lower on a bridge.
Nice. Other missing costs?
So you might have, a decent builder you've worked with before. You might understand the property. You might have done a refurb or two, maybe 3, 4, 5. There's never ever a case that you should not have contingency built in. You need to have a line item that literally says, I think the refurb's going to be 70 grand plus 10% allowance for something I have not foreseen. Like, you're not freaking omniscient. You cannot see the future. And it doesn't matter how many refurbs you've done, you can still have surprises come up, and you can have builders that you thought were one price come to you and go, inflation, my team's costing more. It's going to be another, 5 grand, whatever.
Or the scope is larger. Now we actually need to add an extension to be able to get the extra bedroom, to be able to get the 5th bedroom.
Yeah. Or oh gosh, we didn't realise, but that wall is structural, so we are going to have to put in some steels to support it. You just don't know what you don't know when you first walk into that property.
And you don't get a huge amount of time in the property before you buy it, right? Yes, you can send around a surveyor, but they're not necessarily going to be looking at all the right things. So yes, refurb contingency, and the fact that you don't know what it's for is exactly why it's there.
That's why it's there. And you don't go into a deal thinking that contingency won't be spent. You go into the deal thinking it will be spent, and if for any reason you're lucky and it isn't, it's a bonus. It's extra free money. So I actually put in usually a 20% contingency, just so everyone listening is aware. I've done a lot of refurbs and I still put a 20% on just to be safe, because it just makes life so much better when you know the money's there to cover unforeseen events. And most of the time I use it.
And what we see, obviously there's an aside as well, people don't budget refurbs right, and then they start eating into the money that's in their current account to do the refurb, and then there is no money left in the current account, and then something bad happens elsewhere and they're in a really bad situation. So
the knock-on effect is huge.
It's huge.
So many people get into tough financial situations just because they haven't accounted enough costs, which means they haven't brought in enough money to cover the costs, which means they're eating into their personal money. And then when you run out of personal money, life is stressful.
Yeah, and that's where people go under, right? Because they literally don't have a few grand to pay for something that's essential. It is not worth it.
It's just not worth it. So yeah, contingency on refurb. Another one, when you come to the refinance point, you tenanted the property, there is always maintenance. There just is always maintenance. I look at so many management accounts under my financial management company, and there is maintenance on everything. And one of the big ones that's become very popular is social housing or some form of commercial lease on the property. I honestly, it doesn't matter who the client is, who the social housing provider is, or whomever it is, I still tend to see bits of maintenance cropping up. We have years of data with one of these companies who basically have a good lease. We had a good lease with very, with a very owner, friendly to us in terms of the maintenance that was going to be ascribed to us. It was basically no maintenance at all, only replace capital expenditure, replace a boiler, or if you have a massive leak and you need to repair the pipe work. These things were our costs, and everything else was basically their cost. And over 8 years of data across 3 blocks of flats, I've worked out we're at 2% of revenue on maintenance. Still quite a lot, right? 2% of revenue. So yes, there is always an allowance for maintenance in my analyzer. There is a line item that literally says maintenance, and then I have a percentage, and I just choose what percentage it'll be for that deal. Like I say, if it's a commercial lease, I'll put 2%. If it's a private rented sector, I'll put 5%.
And generally it would be lower at first after the refurb, and then it would escalate as the years go along, right? So really you're sort of basically targeting 5% on average over time.
Yes. Yeah. Although I have to say that I can't tell you how many times I've also seen someone who's just done a fresh refurb and then the next year still has 5%, and that's just because something has been missed in the refurb, stuff's had to come up that's been snagged during the year, and you just, again, you can't account for those kinds of things. So just
in a way, if you haven't spent your contingency, you should still allocate it to one side to say this is snagging is ongoing potentially for 6 months still.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Next one, I would say tenant changeovers. This is an area people just ignore, bury their head and completely ignore. So there's two aspects to this. One is the void period between tenants. And it doesn't matter how slick and good you are, you've always got a chance of this. And I do know a lot of investors, and only probably 1 or 2 people have I ever spoken to who say, yes, every time I get a tenant in the very next day. And I'm not even sure I believe them on that, but regardless, everyone else, it's like when you really drill down to it, it's going to be 1 week, 2 weeks, whatever the number is for you, for them. For us, it's actually close to 3 weeks. 3 weeks between tenants, and that's a period of time when you're not receiving rent, a void period. And you've got to work out how many tenant changeovers you're likely to have, so how long is a tenant likely to stay, and therefore how many weeks void are you likely to have every year for that. So like, for example, for us, a block of flats, I might have a block of 6 flats. I estimate on average between 1 and 2 beds, those tenants stay roughly 2 to 2 years. Let's take 2 years an easy number, 2 years, which means that if across 6 flats, that's 3 tenant changeovers per year I have to account for. And if I estimate 3 weeks per tenant changeover, that adds up to quite a bit of void. It's probably about 1.5% of revenue gone right there. That was very rough maths. Don't go and use the calculator, please, because I've probably got it wrong. But regardless,
if you want rough maths, come to Jack. Your detailed maths go to Dave.
It does work out. Like if you've I did one recently where it was literally someone had thought it would be a whole tenant changeover every year for the whole block, for the whole unit. 2 weeks void between tenants, not very long, that's quite quick and efficient, but 2 weeks is 1.9% of revenue, right? So that's quite a lot. That's almost 2% of your revenue gone. So that, and then you've got to add the tenant changeover costs. So how much is your estate agent or letting agent charging you for it? How
much is your team
your team going to cost? Like quite a lot of letting agents out there are charging, £600 to £1,000 per letting changeover. So suddenly you're down by another £1,800, £2,000 a year if you had 3 tenant changeovers in a year. So it's just being aware of that, doing some maths to calculate it, and it is another dent in your expected net profits at the end of the day. So tenant changeover is another one. And similarly, arrears. Like I bulk arrears and voids together, but you've got to accommodate that some debt, some income will go to bad debt, and you're going to lose it over time. So yeah, we do a 5% allowance for voids and arrears, basically. So we know we're going to lose 5% of rent to that, and if we make it, if we do better than that, brilliant, we're happy. It's extra money, free money.
But I guess if you've got your own data and you're doing better than us than that, great, use it and adjust that accordingly. But the point is, most people just be like, oh, that doesn't even exist, don't even factor that in.
Okay, yeah, it's just getting to know what your numbers are and then bringing them into your analysis. It's really important.
And I think the hard thing is, like, all of this is kind of like just ideas and hypotheses about how it's likely to go, but that it's not going to go like that. Maybe that would come back to that point later, but just putting some thought into it and putting some kind of allocation towards it, because these add up, right?
Yeah, they do. That's the problem, and that's what I've found with all these deals I've helped people analyse over the years. Every time I do it, I would say over 50% of the times, these little things add up to destroying a deal, making it not work. And that's the amazing thing. Is like, well, once you actually factor in all these little things, you're not making as much money as you thought, and then you look at the returns, and instead of being over 20% returns on the money you're using, suddenly it's down to 8% or 7%, and you're trying to pay an investor out of that, and it's all because of these things you just haven't accounted for, but they are unfortunately reality. It's the reality of property here. So yeah, just getting all of those things. Now the way we've operated is I do update my analyzer every time I think of something new. It goes in as a line item, and then next time I see it there, I'm like, oh, am I going to have that this time? Like, it's literally keep on adding things. And I've got several different analyzers I go to. I have one for massive development, complex deals, which includes all sorts of stuff like Mundic surveys. I don't even know what that is really. I just don't even go there. Bat surveys, like it's got everything you can think of. Every survey under the sun you might have to do, including, the community infrastructure levies and things like that. And I don't touch any of that because it's on a separate analyzer with all those things on. I don't want to see it in a normal deal. So then I've got different levels of analyzer depending on the type of deal I'm doing, just to keep things a bit simple. But I know if I need to, I've got an analyzer there with all the line items.
Nice.
Right.
Where do you want to go next?
Well, that's just in terms of variables. There was one other thing I think I wanted to talk about is the time frames. I think people ignore time frames because it's a bit complex to add in. But obviously, if you're managing to turn a deal around in 6 months, or versus say 18 months, it's going to make a big difference to the returns you're making. So, you know, in simple terms, if we used a cash purchase as an example, that money on a cash purchase, if it's your own money, is sitting there not making you any profit except for the profit in this deal. And that, you know, after 6 months you get your profit. If you turn it around, you get a profit, you go again. That therefore is a very different return on that money to waiting 12 months or 18 months. Now, if it's your own money, it's less of a stress. But if that's working with a bank or bridging or investor finance, that adds up to a lot more cost. So I just make sure you include a very sensible estimate of how long the time frames will be. And with regard to this, I would say most people underestimate how long a refinance will take.
It's getting worse.
It's getting worse and worse. Most people are like, surely I'll get it refinanced within 1 to 2 months. No, never, not right now. We're talking at least 3 months for a refinance. So
and that would be good. I'd be very happy with 3 months.
Yeah. So if you're on a bridge and you think your work's going to take 4 or 5 months, so 4 months, say, and then you're going to get your valuer in after that.
Well, then you've got to probably tenant it first, particularly if it's a HMO and you're doing commercial val.
Yeah, then ideally you want to tenant it first. So then you've got to allow your time to tenant it. Then you're going to get your valuer in. From the moment the valuer turns up to your property, I personally would allow another 3 months to completion of refinance. I know it sounds overboard, but these banks are being slow right now. And if you end up with 2 months, brilliant. But it's likely to be 3.
And I think there are so many things that are out of our control in property, and it gets really stressful and it can really weigh you down. So just allow more time in your mind. Yeah. Because if you're not worried about it, it doesn't affect you in the same way.
Exactly. And I've seen too many people get to the end of their bridge term.
We've been there once. Yeah, it was hideous.
It's a horrible situation. So you might as well just allow these extra times and get ahead of the game. So anyway, those are the variables to take into account, and it's really managed by your deal analyzer.
So tell us just the summary of the key areas of variables again.
So variables, we're really getting on top of your end values and your end rental incomes and just being really clear on those and doing some good research on them. Then we've got making sure you've covered every single expense possible under the sun and allowances for things you can't think of, such as contingencies or percentages for things that might happen. And then lastly, we've got the time frames. Make sure you're taking time frames into account.
Nice. The next area is
profit. This is what it's all about, right? We're here to make profit. And the problem with profit is it's very subjective. First thing to note with profit is that there's different types of profit. In fact, in property, I found that there are 3 very distinct types of profit that we've got to take account of. So type of profit number 1 is that you're going to make cash flow out the other side, right? And that's what most people are thinking about when they're doing a normal buy-to-let deal. They're only thinking about the cash flow, and they're going to make some monthly income. That's your passive income that you're aiming towards, right? So you've got your profit. But other than that, you have got ideally some sort of profit that you're making from the refurbishment you're doing, or if not the refurbishment, it might be just from the fact that you're buying below market value. So what I call that is your project profit. So you're making a profit from the fact that you're doing a project, you're buying a property and you're refinancing it. That phase I call the project phase. And just the uplift in value from anything you're negotiated or doing works on is a form of profit. And you hold that from the moment you refinance, you get your valuation, then you can note a type of profit there, and that is returns, counts as kind of returning on the money you're employing. So you've got your 2 key profits, and then you've got a third one. The third one, I think most people ignore, A, because they think it is too hard to work out, right, or too complex to really get right, and B, because they also think that it's it's too unknown, so I don't want to think about it. And what I'm talking about here is capital appreciation. Right now, we're not idiots in property investment. We didn't get into property because we're stupid. We got into it because we're clever, because we can see that property has this amazing long-term gain potential. It's huge. And you buy into property because in the UK in particular, because especially if you're in the south of England, Midlands and down, you're really buying into the fact that once you've bought it, yes, you're going to make some cash flow returns. Yes, you can probably do a good refurb and make a bit of profit there. But if you hold for the long term, that's where the massive money is made. That's why we've got all these international investors buying and leaving their money in London, in the major cities, because they know we are one of the most rock solid investment asset classes. And they don't care about the other two, project or cash flow profits. All they care about is holding their money in an asset class that over a long time will definitely go up and make them great returns. That's what they're looking for. And the fact that if you ignore that, for me it's like you're just burying your head and ignoring probably the most magical part of property investment. It's literally one of the key reasons most people get into it. So I would say having a really decent understanding of your area and how it has developed over the last 20-25 years, what has the increase in value been over that time, and then looking at that, looking forward and say, what do I think it's going to do moving forwards, so that you can make a good educated guesstimate as to what you think the year-on-year capital appreciation will be. Because I'm telling you, it's not going to be zero over the long term. It's not. That's not how the UK works. It's going to be somewhere likely between 3% and 7.5%. Right, 7.5% returns is doubling every 10 years. That's if you do a 7.5% return every single increase every single year on your property. That means in 10 years' time you will have roughly doubled your property value. That's obviously the sales spiel we hear from a lot of people. Doubling every 10 years the property value. It doesn't tend to work out like that.
Yep.
But you are going to be somewhere between that, which means that we want to accommodate that. How much does that mean each year on average? And this is always an average because of course the markets are fluctuating up and down. That's what an asset does. But over the longer term, or I say medium to long, 5 to 10 year term, you should be able to get to a rough estimate of what you're going to be making, and that is important to keep into your figures, because sometimes you might be buying into an area that has less cash flow but has incredible capital appreciation potential.
Yeah, and that was one of the places, that's why we've always chosen places to invest in, well, up until recently, where it's like, why is the area regenerating? And so therefore it's like, why might this area have a higher than average increase in value because of the fact there's a new train station coming in, or
Yes.
something else coming into the area, which means it's attracting more people, and therefore the values go up. I also think you mentioned the south of the UK. I think in more recent times, I'd say even some of the northern countries, it's so far away. Northern cities.
Well, I think
that's part of that regeneration.
People
right?
talk about the north as if it doesn't appreciate in the slightest, right? That cannot be true. I mean, actually, that is just not true, because otherwise they'd still be worth £500 a property, or even less. They'd still be worth £1 a property, right? The fact is they are appreciating just less than some of the southern areas have. But it's actually not that much less when you do the maths.
Have you ever looked at an area where there was no appreciation?
No.
Okay, cool. Great.
Never. The lowest I've seen over a 25-year period, or 20 years... 25-year period, because I always go back to around the 2000s, just a bit before if possible. The lowest I've ever seen from an area is around 2.3% year-on-year returns.
Cool.
Which is good. Okay, so that's the profit, making sure you're really clear on the different types of profit. The second thing is, and this is missing from a lot of people's analysis, you've got to get it away from pound notes, and you've got to get it to returns as a percentage. Now, ROI, return on investment, is literally a universal methodology of being able to level the playing field and make sense of what you're looking at comparative to all other investment classes. We need to be able to see this number, because otherwise there's no way to know if it's performing particularly well or particularly badly if it's just pound notes, because you could have a huge deal, a £1 million deal, a deal that's made you say, £500,000. But if that £500,000 is actually only a small percentage of a massive deal, the returns are going to be very, very low. So it's about looking at it as a percentage of money employed, how much investment has gone in and how much profit has come out, and what is that as a percentage, right?
And getting away from basically cash flow as the number that people... That's hard, because I think as investors we're like, I want to get to X £1,000s a month of cash flow, so we kind of get a bit fixated on that. But you could be making £1,500 cash flow on a deal, but it could be returning at 3%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing is with this is that it you get skewed, and you move away from like what's really important, which is in the end we've got to make money work. Our job is to bring money in, make it work well, in order to get that cash return. So it has to be a balance between the two. And I think what goes hand in hand with returns and ROI is the risk versus reward element as well, because the more complex the deal, the more profit margins you need to see, so the higher returns need to be in order to accommodate the risk you're taking on. So your returns on a smaller, simpler deal, like a simple buy to let, will be smaller, but it's good that they're smaller. That's fine, because you don't need to accommodate such a risk in the market. So you might be looking for cash flow returns of say 10% on a buy to let property. Actually, I'm not going to talk about cash flow returns. I'm going to talk about project uplift returns. That's the biggest one for me. So if you're doing a buy-to-let deal and you're trying to add value to the property and make a bit of project returns, you might be only looking at say 10 to 20% returns on the money you're employing from the fact that you've lifted it up in value. So say you've bought it for 100 grand, you've done 20 grand of works, you've made 30 grand of profit. I'm making this as simple as possible. You've made 30 grand of profit because it's now worth 150 grand. So now that 30 grand on the £120,000 is a 25% uplift. So that would be a nice that'd be a good one. Chunky uplift. Yeah. I wouldn't expect that on a buy-to-let deal. That's too big.
Well, because we've missed a load of costs in that little bit.
Yeah,
and that's part of the problem.
Costs.
Yeah.
So the main thing to note with the risk versus reward is that the more complex the project, the more planning involvement there is, the bigger the refurb, the more builders involved.
The
more variables are involved, the higher you need that return to be on the project. How you need that uplift profit margin to be. So it's just going hand in hand and knowing what is your deal, what are the types, what's your business model, how high is the risk, and therefore what type of returns is a sensible minimum return to be going after for that type of project.
Nice.
That's
Final
it.
area?
Yeah, parties. And I think this obviously feeds on, like I said earlier, from profits. The parties involved have to be satisfied with the returns being made. Now, in most cases, as a growing property business, that means we are bringing on investors. So firstly, you need to be satisfied. You need to make sure you're getting the right amount of cash flow out of any one deal to make it worth your time and effort, because it's very hard to put in loads and loads of works, get the returns really high because you've basically cashed out all the money on an amazing, basically all money out deal. You work really hard and then you walk away with £30 a month. It just feels like it's just pointless. It's just pointless, yeah. Right? So making sure it all tallies up. How much the cash flow is it going to make? Is that enough for you to be worthwhile? All the effort that you're putting in. So you've got to be happy with the cash flow made, and that's probably more to do with cash flow than it is through returns for you. But then when it comes to investors, it's the other way around. Most of the time, most investors are looking for returns on their money. They just want to make sure it's working hard enough. So you do need to have those returns noted in there, and you do need areas of your analyzer. Again, another aspect that is usually missing when I see someone's analyzer is an area where it says how much investor funds are coming in, what's the interest rate on those funds, or particularly if it's a JV partner, what's the profit return for them. So it's just making sure it's really clear how much the investor is getting out of it, and are the returns high enough for that person. But I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. The complex part for me comes because step number one is just from the project itself. It's actually more simple. It's like making sure you've just incorporated another line item of either interest rate for an investment loan, or on the other side of the coin, what's the profit share going to your JV partner on a profit share arrangement, and is that high enough for them to be happy? And you can only do that. That's why you definitely need the ROI. But the more complex part that I think everyone misses is if there's money held in the deal, when is it exiting? In the future, like how is it going to exit? And there's another reason that the capital appreciation side is so important to get pegged into your analyzer, because at some point in the future, you're going to have to refinance again. You're probably going to release money. It's good to know how much money is going to come out on that next refinance, right? And if not all the money's coming back out, if you on the first refinance, then that second refinance is often the point at which you can get the rest of the money back out. So calculating that into your analyzer is really key. So that's it. Those are the three areas.
Epic.
Variables, profit, parties. If you can incorporate all three and make sure every single element is covered, make sure you're making good returns for yourself and your investors, and make sure that there's enough cash flow and enough margin in the deal to weigh up and mitigate any risks, you are going to have a well-stacked deal.
Oh, that was a fun chat with me and Dave. I hope you really enjoyed that one. If you are enjoying the show, please spread the word about the Property Lifestyle Mastery podcast. Let a friend know, and if you're enjoying it, make sure that you've hit subscribe to be notified when our next episode gets released, which will be next week, when you'll be joined again with myself and also the amazing Natasha Friend, who's going to be talking about how to get out of your way to raise 100k. And really getting started with raising finance and what those blockages are that many people encounter along the way. So a real honest, unfiltered conversation that you're really going to love. So until then, have a great week ahead.